Well, welcome to the second in our series of the sort of introduction and exploration of the five maturities. So we added these second sessions. Those of you who live in non-North American friendly time zones, particularly, are able to come and join us at a reasonable time that doesn't make it too late for me here in Amsterdam. So. Anyways, what we do in these series is I've just got a few pieces from the larger report that we sort of talk through and get your perspectives on. But more than anything I've ever done in my life, this is a exploration. It's a continuation of a journey I've been on for 15 years to probably longer to try to help coaching move outside the little box it tends to want to put itself in. And to be able to imagine kind of what the world needs from us now, and how some of our practices may not be up to the task. And so I'm on this journey to start a series of conversations, which began with the Institute of Coaching at Harvard and is now spread to a variety of other places. And us beginning to think about how do we shape a different future for things like coaching. As we go along, I can see most of you at this moment in time, but you're also welcome to put things in the chat box if things come up for you. So this is, there's a couple of small teaching points, but mostly it's inquiry that we're doing together. And so again, I just would love to hear from you. And Lenny, to your question, I'm guessing it's saying, where can we get the paper? So at the about halfway down the homepage on the website at themomentinstitute.com, there's a link you can download the report. All right. So let me just pull up the slides here and we'll get started. And anybody knows they've already got a question before we begin. And the recording the slides will be sent to you after the session's over. There we go. All good? All right. Anybody have anything on their mind, even when they already are arriving? Anything that feels important to you before we begin? All right. So let me find here we go. Here we are. There's January. Okay. All right, this is our part two. And we're going to focus a bit on why maturity is even an important topic, a little bit about the five maturities themselves, and begin to explore one of the tools that's in the report called the matrix, and how we're envisioning using that as we go forward and offer a lot more in the five maturity space this fall in the Northern Hemisphere and next year. Yeah, so there's many things I could say here about why I think this is important, but all you have to do is look at global elections this year, and you start to begin to have a great curiosity about the utter lack of maturity in lots of places. But part of it is that one of my many reasons why I've never been that attracted to goals and coaching is because it focuses, in my mind, too much on behavior. And for behaviors to change, you need a shift in the foundation, the identity upon which that behavior is built. And a lot of that has to do with maturation. And you see this like in people that are beginning, say, as a coach, and they're learning a lot of the skills, but they don't have the experience, they don't have the hard-earned wisdom to actually know how to use them appropriately. So they end up asking lots of great, powerful questions, but ends up feeling to the client like interrogation with love. And so for me, in this time when we feel we're still in many ways in denial about the pandemic, we're quite distracted, and more so as time goes on. We've lost some of our connections to each other, to ourselves, to land. And we sort of have this sort of deep fascination at the moment with polarities and this notion of technology somehow will save us. And so for me, I'm very interested in this analogy I've created around it's like if you've ever been to San Francisco in the summer, it's often the coldest time of the year there because of the fog. And Mila will know that. And there's times when the fog is so thick you cannot even see in front of you on the bridge. And so I use it as an analogy to say that unlike things we might have planned in the past or forecast or looked in over the horizon, I have a sense that what we're needing and wanting for ourselves as practitioners is like San Francisco on a foggy day. We can't really see quite where we're going. So I had this idea of like, well, what if we got some senses of that? Some like I think it's kind of over here. And so one of them, for me, is all the work we've been doing on integrative development. And I think there's other bridges that we need to build to a different future. But it's sort of like we have sort of some senses where some of these things are lying, or at least where they need to be because of the problems we're facing. And what if we just built the first pylon and we gathered on top of the pylon and had a picnic and had a set of conversations about what we're discovering, what we're noticing, what we're fearing, what we're desiring. And we began to create new ways of doing our work. And so the report, which is fairly extensive, is my sort of laying out the landscape of what I think some of those first pylons are and some of the language and frames we might use for that. But again, the purpose of this is for me not to tell you all about that, but for me also then for us to hear from each other about what's important to us. So I want to just use as a starting point one of the frames in the paper as a pretty simple way to begin, and then we'll kind of move on from there and talk more about the five maturities itself. So, so I began to think about how would we depict some of the things that the research suggests is important that we often don't spend enough time on in coaching and in other related professions. So for those of you who are new to this, there's five maturities. Each maturity is fundamentally linked to one mastery. So the one we would recognize the most is competency. A lot of the origins of the whole paper came from my deep desire to move far beyond competency models, but it is one of the masteries. And each of these sort of pairs is particularly connected to one of the five elements of a coaching conversation. But I want to just point out a couple of things that are sort of distinct about this graphic, and then I want to see if anything grabs you. The first off is that if indeed the research has said for decades that the single most important variable for the success of our clients are factors related to the clients themselves. And yet, the vast majority of our training is about how do we become a better coach. But in the end of the day, one could argue that there are many people who know nothing about coaching who actually would be more valuable to many of our clients than many coaches. And the problem is that we don't spend enough time figuring out and realizing that our fundamental job in coaching, as in any profession in that space, is to help the client develop themselves. Because they're the ones who has to go do something differently when they leave the session. And so I wanted to honor that in the way this is depicted so that everything we're doing to develop ourselves, we're doing as much, if not more, to do the same for the client. And part of that's for us to get away from gazing at our own navels, recognize that our real true purpose is to grow our clients. The second thing in there, you'll notice the way I've sort of laid the five elements together is that the emanating or surrounding the coach and the client is the relationship they're forming with each other. Because why? The relationship is the second most significant set of variables. And one of the small shifts I made in the model after teaching it for a few months now is I realized that all the skills that we have, even though there are skills, that when we position the skills, which they were in the original version of this, right after the coach and the client, it perpetuates, at least visually, the obsession we have with competencies. These are my skills I'm going to deploy to do good coaching. But I realized that when you think about capability, which is more this the social maturity, the ability um, to use these our skills wisely, those come out of the relationship. So we're using a skill not so much because we think it's the perfect skill, but because the relational moment or the relational encounter you're having is calling for that particular skill. And so it means that the skills that we're using and the roles we're playing are emerging from the field that we're working in. And it keeps us from thinking, ooh, I know how I can be clever here. Well, I've got a great question I could ask. And then all of this, all of these encounters are held almost like in a cradle by the process. So it's not a linear 1 through 5 steps. It's actually something that holds the conversation and informs kind of what we do. And then out of that emerges the outcomes that hopefully will result for the client. But I'm going to stop there. And again, I don't want to spend too much time just talking about all this way. And there's some other fun things to cover. But to see if this is sparking anything for you as you reflect on your own journey as a practitioner. Anything that you find helpful or challenging or um, anything that's coming up for any of you.
One thing I
Yes,
find
yes.
challenging,
Yes.
David, is the association of the words, like where relationship morphs into some notion of spiritual, or what's meant by
Uh,
spiritual.
and is that the main one you're thinking about, Liz?
No, I think with all of them, I mean, I think
Yeah.
I agree that there's a universe of these maturities, but
Yeah.
how they grow out of the specific aspect of coaching, how they match up, is not clear to me.
Yeah. So the first order of business was identifying the masteries. So we could the first step was for me to say the competencies are a very poor measure of a practitioner beyond the beginner stage. So what are some other masteries that might be useful in thinking about what creates a masterful coach? And so I did that. I created those 5 sort of masteries. It took me a couple of presentations to work out a couple of them, but and they don't cover everything, but they cover what I saw as significant elements of how do we create experts or masters of what we do. Then I asked myself, so what maturity would be a foundation for each of these? And a lot of this came out of a series of papers I wrote about 10 or 15 years ago, looking at the evidence base for coaching and looking at some of the knowledge sets that are sort of requisite in coaching. And so, one could make other kinds of, combinations. So I make no claim that this covers every single thing that one needs to be a masterful coach. Because in the end, the map is never the territory, but at the same time, you can never create a map that includes all of the territory. Otherwise, you're back in the territory. So my focus was what would be capture the essence of what I saw a practitioner did that would provide some language, would give them a way to think about where do I need to spend my development energy and time and money to grow in a way that would be meaningful for me right now based on how I'm assessing myself or somebody else has assessed me. So if I just think about, for example, there's a lot of things that go into creating great relationships. I put it here as spiritual maturity because for me, I use that word with a small s. It may or may not have anything to do with religion, mostly doesn't, but but really around this notion of clarity. So I thought about like what do great coaches do? Great coaches actually are not inherently often significantly better than, say, an intermediate coach. what they excel at is they see far more of what's actually happening in this session. As many of you have heard me say many, many times, I often just invite coaches to just stop coaching, pause their demonstration or their practice, just stop coaching because you're trying so hard to coach well that you're missing the vast majority of what's actually happening. So, yes, are there many other relational skills? Yes, but for me, I thought of it, we're looking at the fundamental building blocks of what creates mastery. When I distilled all that down through the IB model and a bunch of other things, these were the 5 frames that I found most helpful. And for me, I saw as most inclusive of the things I saw were important.
I understand clarity. That was a great
Yeah.
explanation. I wondered about the step towards spiritual with that.
Because for me, that's the essence of what spiritual maturity or spiritual development offers. It allows you to see life, death, uh, your soul, each other, your relationship to the earth, in a much deeper frame.
Okay.
And so, for example, you just take a simple spiritual practice of mindfulness. So you might have in a relationship, there's stress or tension or disappointment or anger, and you come to a conversation in that space, and you realize in hindsight that your fundamental mission was to be right and to prove you were right and they were wrong. That's a mindless way of approaching a conversation and is likely to not be very successful. So the clarity would be realize, oh, the relationship actually matters more to me than being right. So how can I hold this relationship or this relational moment that will allow me to be my best self? Which means I have to see this clearly and not get trapped in old habits or old assumptions or biased viewpoints, but to see the bigger picture, to see the other person's perspective, to see the higher purpose. And again, there's many things that go into creating great relationships, but I looked at what are like I said, the fundamental building blocks of getting really good at something like coaching. And clarity was huge for me. And I saw that the things we understand about spiritual formation, again, with or without religion, doesn't matter. But all the things that allow us to get outside of ourselves, I think I look at things like philosophy is here. I think about things that mindfulness is here. And so this is the way I've tried to do this to make it so that it's not so comprehensive. You could have like 20 of these if you wanted and map the universe more specifically, but then it would be unusable as a teaching or developmental tool. So I wanted to create a simple way to begin on this journey, recognizing that in time somebody else might come along and put some dot points under each one, and maybe there's some sub-maturities. I don't know. So is that enough for now, Liz?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for asking. Then we'll take Susanna and then Abby.
Hey, hi. I just realized that I wasn't on mute before, but luckily I wasn't, didn't have a lot of noise in the background.
Yeah.
So mine is just more an observation and what's really kind of striking me about these 5 maturities and this image. And that is that borders have been put around each one of them, but they are dotted borders.
Yes.
As in there's really no complete definition between one and the other.
Yes.
And that is something that's really been a big part of my learning in the last couple of months. Just the porousness of self and other, of sort of these levels of maturity. And that's just what is really striking me right now.
Yeah. There was a nice LinkedIn post to that effect today I saw, which made the point I too have made it's in the paper, but I've made for a long time, that making distinctions like horizontal and vertical development are useful up to a small point, but afterwards are not helpful because each one actually requires the other. And so that's why I created integrative development, because you actually need both. And I think the introduction of vertical development as a concept was really helpful to help us move beyond linear thinking. So it had like so many of these things had a point in time at which was very important and very sort of pioneering. And now it's become a cliche, like so many of these things become, and it's not useful anymore. And so I want to just look at this to your point, Susanna, that these are, they're clear in the sense of making them definable so that you can actually work with them, but recognizing that they're also porous and that they all depend on each other. And they're not isolated. This is more of an ecosystem than anything else. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. Abby.
Hi, David. Nice to see
Hello.
you. So what I love about this is that it moves away from the coach to the relationship and to the system, as you've just said.
Yeah.
And the spiritual piece, so you've said this as well, that it's about the connection to purpose. And so what I wrote down is that it's about helping them discover or reconnect to what's most important to them or to their essence that might have been eclipsed for a moment.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Natan,
Hi.
there you are.
Yeah. Well, the question that came to me from hearing you speak is, yeah, maybe it's too obvious, but I'm going to say it anyways because that's what's coming to me. If the first single factor that's the most important is the client themselves as far as the results and outcomes, and then you expanded on that by saying, so their level of maturity. So the best thing we can do as a coach is how to help them develop themselves, develop as a person, and
Correct.
develop their maturity. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's the whole thing we're doing, but I guess I just have a question about, so how do we help? Then it comes back to us. So how do we help our clients to mature?
We don't.
Right. Okay.
So many things come to mind. I'll just pick two. So I only saw him and met him once, but Fritz Perls was a complicated, difficult man, but had a lot of brilliant insights about humans. And one of the things that he and others like Karen Horney and others recognized was that frustration has a seminal role in learning and development. But it has to be sort of a Goldilocks. If it's too little, it's not interesting or engaging, and if it's too much, it's overwhelming. And you see this like in raising children. So part of that I see here of part of the sort of Western traditional notion of coaching is we're setting goals, we're setting agendas, we're moving towards things, we're trying to achieve outcomes, we're measuring all these things. But in reality, the best thing we could do to a client at a certain point in time, if it was fitting for them, would be to piss them off, to help them stay in their own frustrations, in their own emotion. I remember doing a demo once with a woman that, again, I would not have normally expected to offer, but in that we did some amazing work together in about 10, 12 minutes for this demo. About halfway through that, she started crying a lot, which was, again, very uncharacteristic for her. And I moved my chair a little bit to kind of manage the space with her. And a significant portion of the people in this graduate coaching program were appalled. And even the faculty person, when we were done, came over and comforted her. So, oh, I'm so sorry. And what can we do to make this better for you? And I just intervened and I asked the woman, I said, what was this like for you? And she said, it was one of the best conversations of my lifetime. But did you, and I said, yeah, I felt a bit embarrassed at first, but I said, my tears were so deep and so authentic. But it wasn't coaching and you shouldn't be doing this. And I said, I don't care what they think. I care because she found value in this and she showed up with extraordinary courage and did some amazing work in 10 or 12 minutes. And so I go back then to our job is, and it's also then why I don't set goals, because the corollary to the fact that the client's the biggest variable is, if you look at all the research on outcomes as well, most of the most significant contributor to outcomes is what happens after the session by far. But we don't spend any time with that. That's why in narrative coaching, we create a lot of experiences and experiments. So we can, in real time, watch people try things. Most people have no safe place to be a beginner, to try new things. So they don't. And so for me, the maturation of the clients, I want to be with them in that space so that when they go back to try something new, they've got a foundation and for that. And it's actually one of the other slides I'll show you in a bit, but well, I'll just show you that now because it's right here. So let me just show that to you. Oops, sorry. Here it is. So so we spend all this time teaching everybody all these coaching skills, which is great. We do that. We do some of that as well. But in the end, the skill is only as good as the maturity as a foundation upon which it's built. Otherwise, and you see this, for example, going to doctors. You go to some doctors, they're brilliant at what they do, but you don't like talking to them. They're not very friendly. They're impatient because they're pressured on time. They want to diagnose something right away. There was a study from Harvard some years ago where they found the average doctor spent 18 seconds listening to patients before they started talking. And then we wonder why healthcare doesn't really work for anybody, not even for the doctors. Why? Because they're not trained to mature themselves to actually hold space for a client while they fumble their way to describe what's happening for them. They don't hold off the drugs that are immediately coming to mind or the diagnoses that are immediately coming to mind to actually hear kind of more of the whole story to get the bigger picture. So that's why I do this, is because I think part of the reconceptualization of coaching, it is going to move away from the assumption we made years ago we should adopt the therapeutic hour as a fixed time. I think we're going to end up with many time variables. We're going to figure out how to think about coaching from the client's perspective, not ours. And we're going to figure out how to use technology to support clients when they need it most, which is how after they leave the session. All right.
Would you say in that answer, David, would you say that, I mean, we can't help other people to mature, but
No.
in a sense is the best thing we can do? I mean, it says it here in the roots picture here,
Yeah.
but by developing our own maturity, that's in some sense the best thing that we can do for
Yes, because then we're more humble to be able to do that for others. And so like you think about like duty of care. So I don't know about your experience, but oftentimes when clients have big insights or breakthroughs in a session and they get all excited about what they want to go do, part of the duty of care is to say, I would recommend you not do that. You just figured this out 10 minutes ago. And now, and most of them have this weird, warped, masochistic need to go tackle the hardest person now that they've got this new skill. I said, they've been that way all their life. You've got 10 minutes of experience at this. Start with somebody who loves you and will accept you and welcome you and give you the safety to practice. And so we want people to be able to grow the foundation so that the things they're learning have the capacity to be grounded and stable and strengthening, which makes them more confident to practice, makes the outcomes better so that they feel more confident to try again. And so we're going back to trying to understand what would this person find most valuable right now. And it might be something that doesn't feel like moving forward. It might be standing still. It might be facing something. It might be, who knows what it is. But a lot of it I've just found more and more is not about tips and tools and techniques, which tend to just be Band-Aids, which sometimes is bad. I cut my finger today, so Band-Aid was very helpful. But in the kind of things that we're doing, Band-Aids are to be used sparingly. And so for me, a lot of what when people present struggles or issues to us, they often have much more to do with their lack of maturity than lack of skill, in my observation. Anybody else for now? And then I'll go back to this model in case anybody wants to say anything, and then I'll show you the other piece I was going to show you. Anything else for now coming to mind? Okay. All right. So I'll show you another piece. So this was, I just put this, some people read charts better than pictures. So this is for you. I like charts. I like organizing the universe. That brings me moments of little joy. But I highlighted those two there because I switched in the early version of the chart. It's now updated in the report itself. Skills were related to professional maturity, and the coaching process was related to the social maturity. But I realized in the end that actually perpetuated the competency bias by equating competencies and skills. Which they sort of are technically, but I realized the way I thought about this was that the competency to call yourself a coach starts in, as a beginner, a fundamental understanding of the basic coaching process, the basic coaching tools, some basic coaching questions. So yes, there's some skills there, but fundamentally you say, oh, I recognize if I were to watch you, I'd say, yes, that's coaching. It's not maybe bad coaching or, beginner coaching, but I recognize that as coaching, not counseling or teaching or something. And then I realized that I wanted to, through this, be able to recognize that the purpose of our skill development is not to acquire more competencies, but to actually acquire more wisdom so those skills become capabilities, which is the ability to effectively and astutely and appropriately apply what we know to a given environment or situation. Yeah. And one of the outcomes of this for me is that thinking about this more systemically, like this chart or the picture before us, allows us to recognize that coaching can look many different ways and still be quite good. Like for myself, I would never in a million years pass an ICF exam. They would not recognize what I'm doing by their chart. And that's fine. I know I have no interest. I have no intention of ever doing that. And for some people, it's helpful scaffolding and it is useful for them. But this allows us to bring more of ourself, more of our background, more of our unique gift, because we're thinking about this of how do I mature as a human being and a practitioner? How do I develop greater mastery, including the things I already know how to do that might not be recognizable as coaching? And so I'll show you a slide at the very end, which sort of points to where I think this is all going. But I just wanted to offer this chart for those of you who learn well through charts and to see it organized kind of this way. All right. So let me just bring up one of the tools here. And then I want to do is just let you muse on it for a couple of minutes, and then we'll see what emerges for you specifically. So, oh yeah, I think I put the moments and meeting stuff in here. I did. Yeah. So again, this goes back to the model with the coaching diagram that moments or meeting is a piece from Daniel Stern and his colleagues around attachment theory, which basically says that one of the best ways to, as somebody was saying earlier, one of the best ways to help a client mature or a child and a parent mature is for the coach to recognize the client is now showing up in a way or at a level or with something they didn't before, and my strategies about how I've worked with them in the past are not going to work here. And so if I go back to the woman that was crying in front of 30 or 40 of her peers in the graduate coaching program, I believe that a significant contributor to people's anxiety and judgment of me was they didn't want to face their own discomfort because they wouldn't know what to do with the woman that's crying in front of them in a coaching session. They felt uncomfortable, so they blamed me. And so a lot of this whole thing is about us being able to have those moments of meeting where the relationship as it stands is not enough because the client's now moved to a different place or done something they haven't done before or shares things in a way that they haven't before. We've got to rise to meet them. And so then we have to both evolve ourselves to have a higher level conversation. And so that's kind of what this is doing. And so the way I've put this together is to map what you just saw to a way of, over time, we're building some ways of assessing and thinking about this for ourselves and for others, not so much to credential them or assess them, but for us as we think about like we go to a program on neuroscience and coaching or something, we learn a whole bunch of cool things about the brain, which may or may not be actually useful to us. But then it's like, well, but what are my current cognitive habits and what are my current cognitive blind spots and how am I going to use my all this new knowledge I have in a way that's actually going to be useful for my clients. And so this is the beginning. This is not the end all be all. This is the beginning of a conversation of how do we help ourselves discern more accurately if we want to get better at something, or if we want to understand why maybe a certain client relationship is not working very well. How would we do that? And so we built up this piece where we started looking at if in each of these sort of 5 domains, how would I map the dilemma I'm currently facing? Which of these domains would probably be in which of these domains would it behoove me to spend some more attention? And so like you might say, I feel like I did a really great job coaching them. I felt really sharp. I felt really on point. I felt I was, doing all the things I've been trained, and yet the client wasn't responding very well or didn't really seem to enjoy themselves or take much from the session. Then you might think, social maturity. There's something about their environment that I wasn't really tracking. Did I not apply what I knew very effectively? And so my skills were sort of squandered in a way. And she might realize, wonder if our gender difference or our racial difference had impact. What if I didn't really fully understand the complexities of their workspace? And so I was kind of naive in how I was coaching them and not very politically savvy, for example. And I was basically setting them up for disaster. And so it's just the beginning of as we're debriefing, particularly things that are not going well, or on the flip side, aspirations for doing better with certain clients. Where could we begin our own search for what we might find helpful for ourselves in terms of guiding our growth? Okay, so I'm going to stop there for just a second and see if anything comes to mind for any of you. What, Lenny, do you have a question? I can't quite hear your hand. Okay, there it is. Then Dan, I'll come back and answer your question. I just saw that in the chat box. But Lenny, what's on your mind?
Okay, I'm just adjusting my volume. Is that better?
It's great.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking, you said that it's not 5 steps. And I loved somebody describing it as an ecosystem that, is very, we used to call biofeedback, and you're constantly adjusting. And it seemed to me that when I think back of my clients, and in all humility, that the connection, what you talk about, that relational feel, we have to understand the context that the person's coming. And as that emerges and we see what they do, what they think, what they feel, how they operate in that, then we start to get a sense of the other dimensions.
Yeah,
Same time that relational field is maturing, right? It's like a
yes,
third, it's a container
exactly. Yeah,
that we're bringing and drawing from and sharing. And it's very hard for me to imagine separating those things.
yeah,
So, when you say it's good to pause and just kind of tune into what's going on in the field, part of the challenge for me sometimes is, what do I pay attention to first?
hmm.
Where do I put my noticing and my intuiting and
Mhm.
whatever, because there's so much in
Yes,
it. So that's the
yeah,
question. How do we kind of level ourselves and get
yeah,
stay open, but where we can discern and
yeah,
choose where do we go? Okay.
yeah. And for me, and I don't mean this flippantly at all, but in some ways it doesn't matter. That there's no one front door to the house of the client. And they might welcome you to sit on the back porch, or you might sneak in through the window. Or so I just try to, as you get more and more adept at this, you start weaning out things that are not probably going to be very useful. But there's, if I look at the faces in the call, many of us have lived long enough where we've wrestled with some of the same issues our entire life. And we'll go to our grave with those issues still present, but probably a little bit softer, less cumbersome, a bit more evolved. But there's this fantasy that somehow we need to keep, if we just did perfect coaching, we'd create perfect clients. What's ridiculous. So you sort of look at, well, what resonates for the client? What do they grab onto? What do they run away from? Oh, they have some interest here. There's some energy here. Let's go explore that as a piece of this puzzle. And is in part as a way to answer you, Don. So they're only in this order, not at all because of importance. They're in this order because of degree of complexity to me. We start with ourself is the simplest possible thing. What can I do for myself? We look to the relationship. We look to the basic process we're in it's why we're relating. We're in this process together. We look at what are we actually doing and all the variables and choices we have about doing. And then ultimately we look at context, which is the ability to see all of them at the same time. So that's why they're in that order. But as several of you just said, including you, Lenny, they're all happening at the same time. But again, so this is not to say the world looks exactly like these maps. These are designed to have a way that balances enough complexity to map reality, but enough simplicity to actually support our growth. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else for right now? Then I want to show you one other thing, and then we'll see where we're at.
Yeah, David?
Is it L? Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. I sense co-creation, simultaneity, okay,
Mhm.
and something to wrap this rich conversation together. I think we could wrap it and just clearly say that we need to honor the paradoxical effect of all of it,
Yes.
And that paradoxes project opposites, and yet at the same time, it's kind of a dance, okay?
Yeah.
And so just some explanation of paradoxes can be contradictory and kind of absurd and unbelievable, and a lot. They bring a certain richness to this,
Yeah.
and sometimes there's no language, and so the key element then is to me is co-creating, and it's not what I do and you do. No, this is kind of the Dan Siegel we kind of thing.
Yeah.
What do
Mhm.
we co-create in the moment of shared meaning? And that in that paradoxical move that speaks really, I think, to deeper aspects of the spiritual side is really this is an interaction of trust
Mm-hmm.
and co-trusting. And so
Yes.
I think the elements of trust in paradox kind of just shape this real nicely in a lot of ways. And it isn't like a lesson you start there. You have to be in a conversation to even say these words now, because it's not a concept, it's a way of being. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's
And if I just match what you were saying, Al, to what was just said a few moments ago, it's sort of the origins of this sort of sense and this frame that's coming up for me more and more about the moment we're in is our curriculum. And we can't know what's going to be the revelatory piece of a conversation or the telling moment. And going back to some of what Lenny was sharing. And I was thinking about that today. I got an email from an old friend I knew from high school, and we had I knew him fairly well back then, but we had bonded because I'd heard that my best friend from most of my early life had died, but I didn't know why, and I couldn't find any information about it. And so Steve was able to kind of dig a bit, and find out that he had killed himself quite violently, which was shocking for both of us, and because it was so unlike what we remembered about him. But then this little tiny email exchange reminded me of the memory of last year when Steve found out, and we had this long conversation, and then a whole universe of that whole phase of my life opened up again for me to now look at from a very different way. So I feel like even in those couple of hours of reflecting this afternoon about that whole period of my life and how it all seems now, I could feel this sort of maturation happening even in myself as I was looking at myself now. And some things shifted in me that actually had a significant impact on what I was working on in my business today. But I didn't plan that. I didn't structure that. I didn't make that happen. It was a random email that I chose to take advantage of and use for my own growth. And so a lot of when we focus on competency models, coaches are asking themselves, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Wrong question, or at least not a very useful question. I'll put it that way. There's no wrong questions. Not very useful. It's a rabbit hole. Those are rabbit hole questions. And so again, we're trying to kind of, again, just like we're trying to balance the emphasis away from us to our client, we're sort of balancing the emphasis from our own self-judgment to our own perception of what happens outside of us looking back in. What did I notice about the impact of what I just did? How do I feel now compared to how I felt an hour ago? Realization I need to stop and reflect on what just happened in this seemingly innocuous one-sentence email that sent me on a 3-hour maturational journey that was profound, that I was not in my diary for the day, but felt like, yes, I felt called to step into this, and it was significant. And so now we're in service of the moment, not of our expectation or formulation or anything about what we think is supposed to be happening. So I want to just use that as a bridge to the last piece I'd like to share. And we put these sessions as only an hour because it'll be late here, it'll be midnight here for me in a few minutes. And but I'm happy to stay on for as long as we want to talk. So up to a point. But if we don't have to, the other sessions for these are 90 minutes. So if you want more time, I'm happy to give that to you. But I want to share the last slide with you, and I've updated it since we last met. So you saw this before. There's a few new pieces to this. Okay, let me get this out of the way here. All right. So what does all this mean? So I tried to, as simply as I could, map how I saw the old world, the sort of the current way we think about professional practice. And so we decided at some point in our career, we want to take on some practice. Like I want to be a coach, or I want to be a therapist, or I want to be a university professor or whatever. And in the West in particular, it's easy to get caught up in a consumption mentality. I need to keep inhaling more, more books, more courses, more everything. Because the more I know, the better off I'll be. But then we often end up with a lot of acronyms, and things get really commodified. But these are all the things we believe are going to shape how we work. And there's value in that. So there's a value in this old world. I'm not advocating we overthrow it. I'm just saying, for me, it's nowhere near what we need now. And the systems that used to guide how we work are all breaking down. And so, but in the old days, we would identify, yeah, I'm a new coach, or I'm a new OD practitioner. But in the course of getting better, we would then deepen our preparation. But again, this was in service of prescribed knowledge. We'd read all the key books and go to the key trendy things. And this was all with the assumption of what we should know so that we can make good diagnoses. Now, again, this is there's way more to this, but I'm trying to simplify it just for the distinction I want to make in a minute. But so we're preparing ourselves by acquiring as much of the prescribed knowledge as we can, so we can sound eloquent and articulate. We can have a better understanding of how to do our role as a practitioner. And then if we're really ambitious, then we join a profession. Coaching is not a profession, but it wants to be one. And there's other things like OD and psychotherapy, which do have actually more standing as a profession. But that's to play a prescribed role. So if I go back to the demo with the woman who ended up crying, if we had been at a funeral and she was crying, no one would have said anything to me. But because I was outside their perception of my prescribed role as a coach, even more so a master coach, then it was difficult for many people, because I wasn't being who they thought I was supposed to be. I should have taken better care of her. I should have calmed her down, or got her, which I would have found very insulting if I were her. But our focus is on effectively implementing what we were trained to do. And again, this is great. I want to know that my doctor knows how to. I had my shoulder replaced in January. I want to know that he knew what he's doing, right? He can implement all the best procedures and do them well. And that works well in a world that's relatively static, relatively stable, but relatively a lot of things, very little of which we have now. So this is where I think all this is going. There's some bits in the paper about specifically what I think this means for coaching, but I want to put just sort of coaching aside for now, because I think coaching is going to change radically through AI and a number of other things. But I wanted to speak more generally about practitioners like coaches, which includes like psychotherapists, trainers, and the like. So this is where I think is the new world is going to be like, and already is. People like me and many others have been working this way for a long time, but I think more of us are going this way. So big distinction. So like, for example, I did part of this I observed when I gave 2 sessions on the 5 Maturities at the recent IOC conference at Harvard. And half the room were coaches and half the room were surgeons and doctors and other health professionals. And there was a number of surgeons that, for a number of reasons, were taking health coaching classes to kind of enrich their practices. And they were just laughing, because when they would try to go like apply for ICF certification, they just felt like all some of them even had PhDs on top of their MDs. That none of that counted, because they had to fit into this little tiny box of competencies. So in my belief, if I think about how I've worked when I've been at my best, how I've observed other masterful people at their best, is that they start with themselves and preparing themselves. So this is why I'm focusing on maturation and integration of everything, the best of who we are, how we are, what we know, what we've done. And it all becomes available when needed in service of that moment and that client. Otherwise, to me, it's like trying to hand a paint by numbers kit to Picasso. What a waste. So for me then, but we still need accountability. We still need others. We still need community. So I think what's going to emerge, and many of us have already started to create for ourselves, is we've stopped going to conferences for the content because most of it's the same old stuff. We go there for interesting people that we know or dear friends and colleagues we know. Many of us are starting to branch out into other disciplines and other communities because they know things we don't. Because I think what's happening, going to happen, is that the complexity that we're being asked to address with our clients is now such that if all you do is come in as a trained coach, you will be increasingly inadequate to deal with what the client is bringing you. And so we have to stay within our integrity and within our agreements and all that for sure. And I believe that more and more of our practices are going to be transdisciplinary in nature to match the transdisciplinary issues our clients bring. So rather than have us going back to the old model of I've therefore got to consume all this myself, which is ridiculous, I think we're going to end up with communities that they could be regional communities, they could be communities of interest, where you have people with varied skills, varied knowledge sets, who are going to be in the mix around all of us as we begin to do more and more work in a new way. So rather than what I know as the factor, like in the old world, the new world is what is already known. And that what is already sensed, what can I feel here? And so we're less interested in diagnosis and much more interested in dialogue with those we're serving. And then we bring ourselves and this community and this now transdisciplinary knowledge to bring ourselves as a practitioner. But this is a practitioner that has a very agile role, because our fundamental guiding principle is what is needed here. And the example I think of is all the significant integrative development projects I've done over the years. One of the requirements, and I even got a lot of them to rewrite their contracts. I said to them, you can use everything I'm going to give you in any way you want. Because to me, the more you use what we're teaching, the more it's going to be in your system, and the more things we can get done, and the more projects I can do, and the longer I can work with you and do good things. But as part of that, the other requirement that I had was that I will only work with you if you hire David. If you put me in a box of OD person or trainer or coach, I'm not interested, because it tells me that your thinking is still siloed, which means you're going to give me siloed problems, that things you imagine are siloed, and expect me to stay in that silo to try to solve with. And so I realized that in the end, what most of us will become in some way to varying degrees, because the part of the old world still work, we're going to become masters of improvisation. We're going to take who we are, who we're with, what we do, and we're going to bring the best and most fitting pieces of that to whatever is being asked of us in the moments that we're in or this context that we're in. And so all the stuff that we've sort of talked about for the last hour or so are all just gearing up for either within professions, but more likely even beyond professions, a new kind of practitioner that is going to increasingly work in very different ways, aided by AI and other technologies, but also aided by people we normally wouldn't spend time with because they're not in our profession. So I'm going to stop there, and it's a lot, and it's quite provocative in many ways, but I'm just going to stop there, and I'm happy. There's just one more slide after this, but I think I'm going to take the slides down if I just double check that. Yes. And see what thoughts you have. I'm going to just check the chat box what you're thinking. Very reassuring. That's good. Mm. Yes. Yeah. One of the most fascinating, I'll come back to you in a second, you, John, but one of the most fascinating conversations I had with the surgeons, there was these two African-American surgeons that were just wonderful to chat with. They came to my talk, one of my talks. And they were trying to ask, you could see them trying to translate all this from coaching into their world. And I said, well, I'll give you the example of why I chose the surgeon I did for my shoulder. And some of you have heard this story, but, and I shared why, and it had everything to do with their maturity, their ability to meet me, take me seriously, the maturity of their staff. And I already had vetted them for competence. And and they were shocked. They said, we weren't taught any of those things in medical school, not one of them. And I said, yes, that's why it's why healthcare doesn't work very well. And yeah, so they were very intrigued. The two of them were actually taught coaching by a dear friend of mine. So they called him right away and said, Jonathan, you need to include some of this in your program, because but it's beginning to think about how we engage people and engage with the things we're tasked with doing in a very different way. So you done, and then Joe.
Thanks, David.
Yes.
And I'm not showing my face because it's very early morning in Sydney,
Yes.
Australia.
Yes,
so
it is.
I don't look my best.
Okay.
But I wanted to comment on this because this is very reassuring. Briefly, I struggled a little bit because I recently finally took the ICF competency exam for my PCC after 15 years being a coach. I mean, I'm so glad I didn't do the PCC. I didn't do the exam until 15 years after being the coach.
Yes.
Because I'm already set in my way. So I really just did the exam for the sake of study exam. But yeah, it really confused me and really restrictive in a way. I hope this recording is not going to anywhere to revoke my PCC qualification.
No. And I'll vouch for you if they give you a hard time.
But so now I was really puzzled and struggled during the exam prep, and after I get through the exam, I thought, oh my gosh, I wouldn't do it in so many ways in my real scenario. So I'm so glad a week after I got my PCC, I'm on this webinar and hearing about your approach. So on one hand, I'm relieved. On the other hand, as practitioner and a community member, I am also a little bit worried for how some of these professions, especially new coaches, are getting trained if they rush into the competency framework too quickly. So yeah, it's just giving me a lot of thoughts. And what do I need to do as a coach is continuously working on my maturity, use my intention, use my heart in the moment rather than thinking so much about other things,
Yeah. And so it's comparable, like in the American high school now, everything's about standardized tests. So what they're really measuring is our kids who are good at tests. And I hear from a lot of our students that like you went after these exams and they just pace the competencies by their screen. They pick an easy client. They have a nice conversation. They tick all the boxes. And it's not that the competencies themselves are bad, but it just, again, there's so many other things that I'm looking for. And it's really hard to scale competencies past the beginner level. And mastery is just not more competency. It's a whole bunch of other stuff. So, Jill, did you, your hand was blending in with your books. That's why I didn't see it before. I apologize.
Hi, thank you for this. This is really interesting. I am a new coach. I'm a health and wellness coach, so I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach, and just got my competency exam back in December. So,
okay.
But, this is all, coming to coaching with a whole bunch of life experience, right? And so this is all resonating. I have a can of worms question, so I don't expect you
Okay.
to go too far down this path, but I'm interested if you would touch on the role of AI in this new world of integrative disciplinary coaching.
Yeah, it's a big question. So I actually
Yeah.
consult a lot and work for an AI coaching firm that's doing some pretty amazing things. And I'm actually going to be in Zurich in a couple of weeks presenting on the ethics of AI and coaching. I helped ICF write standards for AI and coaching. So I played a lot in this space. So there's a lot I can say about it. The thing that interests me the most now, from a learning and development perspective, and I just finished a really good book on this, but I think AI, there's some, I'll pick two things I think AI will be really good for coaching, and one thing that I think will be bad for coaching. And there's more, but I'll just pick those three. Two things that'll be good for coaching. One is that in very short order, we'll be able to automate that way and supplement a lot of the basics of coaching, which I see as in some ways a good thing because it allows it to be used and available to more people. Right now, it's too rudimentary, but even I know like my daughter and her friends, they don't have the money for a therapist, but they need help. Their mental health's been challenged these last few years. They go to some of these apps where it's a blend of humans and AI, and they find it very valuable, and they can get it for $30 an hour or $20 an hour. So I think that will be helpful that way. And the second thing we'll be helpful at is that it'll provide data for supervisors and mentors that are either tedious now or hard to track as humans. And will help us, especially in terms of structuring what can happen after a session, like with nudges and things to support new behaviors. One of the many reasons why it will be challenging on the commercial side, the ethics side, et cetera. But one that I'm finding really interesting right now is that I've had this long-held fascination with guilds of old, and one of the things about guilds is that, and you see this still in some of the blue-collar trades like plumbers and electricians, where you have this very set levels you move through of, apprentice and then novice and then apprentice and then journeyman and then or journeywoman and then master. And part of that was watching experts, pretty clear what pathways to get there. But that included a lot of things where you had to get your hands in there and try things and have your mentor guide you and work with you in real time. When you sort of, my fear with some of if people are enamored with AI and they sort of take out those gaps, they fill the gaps with the AI. Like, give me 10 good questions that I could ask here in this client situation, and ChatGPT will give you 10, reasonably respectable questions. But then you'll pick one, it feels like a win, but then you think about, so many of the things that allowed us to evolve as a practitioner was all the times we screwed up and asked what we thought was a brilliant question that turned out to be insulting to the client or too offensive or too challenging, and they shut down. And so the ability to learn from masters, because right now AI is really supporting, that level. All the things you have to go through to go from novice to mastery, if too much of that is hollowed out and handed over to AI, we won't make the legions of mistakes and the trial and error, the felt experience we have. If I think back to my 25 years ago, my first coaching sessions, they were by standards now, they were horrible. Absolutely. They weren't dangerous and they weren't awful for the client, but they were so mediocre because it was all brand new. There were no coaching books back then, really. And I would hate to be starting now and just be relying on AI too much. So that's one of many concerns I have. I think in the end, it could be a net positive. But again, what's going to then stand out is the people that are mature enough to handle the things AI can't and shouldn't.
Thank you.
It's not more hours. Yeah. And it isn't 10,000. Yes. Yeah. Colleen.
Thanks, David. On the previous slide, when you were showing the old and the new, and you were
Yeah.
referring to in the new about the community, and it was
Yeah.
about, I think it was about what to know,
What is known?
what is known. Okay.
Yeah.
So is it about what's known from us as the practitioner that we can bring to what's needed in that moment? Or what were you referring to there?
So I put it in that sort of awkward sentence structure because I'm in front you, and you would appreciate being in our class, Colleen, but in the field, whether it's a classroom, a training workshop, a coaching session, we're sensing what is known here, that we're each bringing to this, that we're sensing in real time. This also includes what's not known, like, which is again where others might help us. And so that this will require more dialogue and less didactics about do this and only do this, or this is the right way or the best way or the only way. And so I'll give you a funny example. So when I had my shoulder replaced, you're still conscious when they wheel you into the operating room. And I've shared this story to some of you, but bear with me. It's still, I think, so hilarious. But so they wheel us into this pretty long operating room. And on one wall for, I don't know, 50 feet, there's a bench with power tools on it. And I knew that they'd have to cut bone and drill things, but it was very disconcerting because I felt like I was going into auto shop to get a tune-up. And I told this to the person that was wheeling me in. I said, what were you all thinking? Like I was totally, I'd done my meditation. I was in complete bliss. I was ready for the surgery. And now you've scared the crap out of me again. Because I'm visualizing, I'm feeling into my arm. And I felt I was in pain already before they even started. And he goes, well, we want to be ready. So we've covered some up. I said, oh, there's more that I can't see. So he said, yes. Oh, and I said, this is not helping. It's making this worse. And he said, well, we have to get things ready. And I said, yeah, but could you just like cover it up for the patient? We don't need to see this, right? And I'm I can actually meditate my way through most pain. So I have more going for me than most of your patients. But I said, their stress level goes through the roof. We'll just cover them up with a nice, like warm, fuzzy blanket or whatever that's, sterile. And then when I've knocked out, then you can pull back the curtain and have at it. But anyway, so that would be example of what is known. What is known for them is we want to be efficient and we want to be ready, but they're not paying attention to the other part of what is known is what I know, which is I don't like this. I don't like seeing this. I'm finding it unsettling. And so there is no dialogue. There was for me because I spoke up. And when they couldn't do anything about it at that point, the cat was already out of the bag. But I said, you might want to just think about what the experience is like for the patient.
Thank
What a
you.
novel, which was a completely novel concept to him. Yeah. Anyways, I don't want to rag on them. They did a great job and I'm very happy, but that was not a good thing. Yeah. Yeah. High school shop class. Yes. Make the ashtray out of, yeah. Yeah. So anything else that feels important to you, Lenny?
Yeah, just that I'm thinking about art versus science. Not that it's
Yeah.
versus, but the
Yeah.
distinction between art and science.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about to me is art. And there's I worked for many years in consulting with a lot of engineers as clients and colleagues. And there's such a difference in engineered ways of looking at things and engineered solutions. This is an old-fashioned and out-of-fashion word, but holistically. And sometimes it's hard to articulate what an artist does, and I am a painter. So I was just reflecting on that. And what
Yeah.
you said to me earlier that really resonated was sometimes you just pick something and you go with it.
Yep.
You don't have to analyze and structure and all of that.
Yeah.
And this is so much more freeing. So there's this
Mhm.
agility piece, but it also frees all of us to bring, as somebody else was talking about, bring their whole self.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just stop thinking about it, just have a go, as
Yeah.
my Australian friends say, have a go,
Yeah. There you go.
play, take a risk.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's a place for art and science. But I feel like we've overprivileged one for the other. Um, yeah. I take this. Oh, it's already. Let me put this back up for a second. Yeah, so here's our chart again. So again, if you haven't seen the report, you can download them from our website. It's on the homepage, about halfway down or 2/3 of the way down. We're gonna be having a 6-week series starting in October that'll be out soon. We're gonna do an immersion in each of the 5 maturities, sort of like our BCEs, but give you a felt experience. I've now mapped the stages in alchemy to the 5 maturities, so we're actually going to pretend like we're alchemists and help you get down to the essence of something you would like to work on for yourself. So that's coming. And then next year, we're going to have some ongoing study groups, and we're actually going to turn this into retreats because I want my however many years I'm gifted after this, I want to spend all my time with the new world. I've lost interest in the old world a long time ago. So I want to gather on top of pylons with people in this community space to figure out the kind of ways of working, ways of being, ways of structuring things that we need now. And yeah, that's where I'm heading. And so we're going to spend a lot of time next year looking at that. I think that's the last one. Yeah. So I'm just going to take this down and just ask if there's anything that feels important for you to feel complete for the session. Yes, Jill.
So I just have a question for myself, so I apologize if this isn't really relevant, but I found you because I was looking for information on narrative coaching. Are you
Yes.
still teaching narrative coaching? Are you moving beyond that? And I asked because I'm recently a referral partner with an integrative medical clinic, and they talk a lot about story. And so
Yeah.
I'm a journalist by training and a health writer.
Okay.
So I'm trying to like bring all this together, and it's an interesting fusion to me. And I'm like, oh gosh, is that like passe now?
Yeah.
Have you moved beyond that? Or like, what do you recommend? Because this is really interesting, but I also
Yeah.
very about that.
Yeah. I I created narrative coaching out of self-defense
Oh,
because there was no space for me in coaching at the time. And then I wrote a lot and did a lot of research and writing and got a PhD in coaching so this is the last year we're teaching narrative coaching as a regular typical program.
okay.
And if you were to see my desk upstairs, you would see 25 years of all my work spread across my desk, being ready to. So all those slides are becoming a small book.
So I have a
Yes.
large book.
You have a large book. That was written in the middle of a divorce, after a divorce, and to capture everything before darkness fell. And so it was meant as a definitive guide to all the research that created narrative coaching, recognizing it's not really meant as an instruction manual. So we're going to put what we're building as a learning community, because we're going to take the principles of ID. I go back to the thing you posted a while back, Janet, about how you learned French with snowballs in the classroom. Yeah, so that's what ID is. So ID is basically modeled around children who learn from doing.
What does ID stand for?
Integrative development.
Okay,
So let me just, I can explain this trajectory now. So we're gonna IDize the narrative, all the programs. So
okay,
we're gonna decenter the content, upcenter practice, uh, um, such that we'll have a book with all the information in it, but it would be much simpler, probably 100 pages, lots of pictures. And each chapter will be linked to some commentary recordings from me that my daughter's coming this weekend to interview me for 2 days. We're going to record those, which will be a blast. And then there'll be practices and assignments. And then if you want, then there'll be an opportunity to sort of buy your way into the use of Ovida and some practice spaces. And we're using, and then integrative development was basically the same philosophy as narrative coaching, but it allows you to use it in any moment in time, to find the learning and growth potential in any moment in time. So it started out as a theory of learning and development and soon became 15 years ago, the design strategy for all my projects.
okay.
And then the 5 maturities is then takes both of those and takes the next step. Like, what if you left behind coaching altogether? Coaching could still be there as a skill set, but it's not, for me, it's not a thing anymore. I haven't been a coach that way for a long time. And then build an ID to say, what if you were away from, which was combining coaching, training, and OD to start. So what if you were just yourself? We just hired Jill. And we knew what Jill, we knew what Jill knew. And we knew what Jill could offer us. And somebody would say, oh, this would be perfect for, we needed Jill. That would be perfect for us right now. And so part of this comes in, being able to start educating our clients. Stop asking us for workshops. They don't work. Right? They're not going to solve the problem you think they're in the way you think they are. So it's starting to invite us all into these community conversations where somebody was I'm working on one of my projects, and one of our students works on the team that's sponsoring the project, and she realized, oh, this is like, rather than going out and like interviewing our clients in the business and doing a diagnostic and assessments and then coming back with recommendations, we're going to go out and just sit with our clients and let them tell us about their day, tell us stories about what's going on. And then together we're going to go, and we're going to use what we know to ask better questions, not give them the answers. And then we may or may not do something for them. We may or may not do something they even recognize. But it's going to start with sitting with them. And so if you wait a couple of months, about 2 months, you'll have the opportunity to join us next year. And if you want a certificate in narrative coaching, we can get you one of those. We'll show you the path to that. Otherwise, you can immerse yourself in the learning community and hang out with other people studying narrative coaching. And then, but you can do it in whatever order you want. You can hang out with whomever you choose in the community. You can go as fast or as slow as you want. And then if you want to practice and accelerate beyond just sort of the beginnings of this, we can help you do that as well.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I just need more time to write, and I need more time to work on the Ovida projects and create more pylon conversations about the future of all of this. And it's very hard for experts to teach because we've long forgotten how we got here. It's just who we are now. And so, it's time for me. And we have some wonderful people on our faculty, and they're going to help lead the community and support the students. And I'll drop in every now and then so you can ask me crazy questions. Anybody else for now? Oh, good.
David, just a big thank you from Australia, New Zealand, or APAC, wherever
Yeah.
coaches are, so that we can attend this in person. It's you, Dan.
Yeah, and we're gonna, and when it's gonna be a little bit trickier in the coming year because I'm moving to Amsterdam in October, so I'll be on this time zone. And so we've figured out a schedule that I think is workable for everybody most of the year. And then we'll just have to find ways to bring me back to Australia, and then we can do all this in person and have fun.
Yes, I missed that retreat.
I know, yeah.
please.
Yes,
I'll second that.
Talk. Let's talk.
okay. All good? All right. Thank you for joining me on this adventure. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me that you, and stay tuned for more to come.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.